the cheaper my cost of capital, I can do more projects than the person with a higher cost of capital, right? If I have a firm with AAA credit rating, AAA rated bonds, I can borrow at the lowest possible. I have an advantage over companies that borrow at AA rated. I can do stuff that they can't do. Why? Because my cost of capital is lower. It makes a little more sense than, hey, I have more debt, therefore I am worth more. Is there something going on? What's the sound?
It's vacuuming.
Okay. I thought they were sawing something.
Is there anything we can do about that for next week?
Huh?
It's bugging me.
It is kind of annoying. I'll find where they're
It's been like a half
They're
hour.
next door.
at. They're next door?
Yeah. Should I hit the wall or tell them to push out?
Well, who speaks Spanish? See, or no? No? Yeah. Yeah, go tell them. But there's a class in there, though. There was. No, not now.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're paying big bucks for this class, right?
It's like an industrial. I didn't even know they vacuumed the floors. Let's see if it stops. Let's see if anybody screams. Hold on. Remember, Jose, if he hurt the person, we don't know anything, right? Deal?
Deal.
He did what? No, he was just sitting right there all the time.
They were Hispanics.
We made a pact to you. We said, if you had to hurt somebody, he was sitting right there the whole time. We had no idea. We don't know what happened. The person could have fell down several flights of stairs. We don't know. Oh, share repurchases. Why do we repurchase shares as a company? Oh, is it because we're nice? No. Why do we do it? Make our what look better? EPS. Because I have net income divided by what? Shares outstanding. We talked about this last week. Therefore, if I make more money, and then I drop this, what happens to EPS? It goes up. What happens when EPS goes up? Shares go up. Why? Hey, look, the earnings per share went up. If we don't take a look, guess what? I don't know. It looks better, right? EPS was 150, now it's 175. Champion of this is IBM. They can gain a lot of money. So why would they do that? Why would management do that? What's their stake in the company? They have options. Stock goes up, they make more too. Does it improve the value of the company at all? But they are quite popular. Arbitrary pricing. So here, now they're going to borrow $100 million, but they're only going to buy back 75 million of shares. Here's a calculation method. Here's where we should repurchase the shares. 15.5. Shares remaining and new share price. What did that do? The shares had no what? No reaction, did they? Back at that balance sheet, we were talking about that last. Assets versus liabilities, reamounts, original assets, interest tax shield, makes your company what? More, right? Therefore, go home and borrow more money. How do personal taxes affect interest or dividend payments? I get a dividend,
Thank you.
it's taxed at what? My tax rate, 15%. When I have a capital gain, it depends upon what? How long I held it for. If I hold it for greater than a year, what happens? 15%, I hold it less than a year, it's my tax rate. So an individual can decide on when they can distribute capital gain. We talked about that. The amount of money investor will pay for a security depends upon the cash flows. Yes. Boy, some of these slides are kind of redundant. Look at what's happened to the top tax rate. It was 48% in the 70s. Now it's at 35%. Look at how interest income and look at how dividends were taxed. So in the 1970s, if you got interest income, you were taxed at 70%. Dividends were taxed at 70%. Capital gains were 35%. Guess what the market did in the 70s? Flat. Nothing going on. As we've lowered taxes, it's made it what? More advantageous to invest, besides just putting all our 401k. So, about that one. Tax advantage with personal, without personal tax, and the highest tax rate. Not too much. Okay. Tax rate times the debt. Remember, it's the interest tax shield, right? With personal tax, the firm's equity and debt cost capital just to compensate investors for their respective tax burdens. So, the only money I receive from a firm is what if I'm an investor?
The dividends.
A dividend, right? Personal tax disadvantage for debt causes the WACC to climb more slowly with leverage than it would otherwise. Okay, we've got $100 million recap. You know what that means? We've moved money around. What do we move it to? If I bought back shares, what would that look like on my owner's equity side or stockholder's equity side?
Reduced.
Treasury stock, right? Which would be a negative, right? In relationship to regular stock. Reduce my equity component, which would therefore increase my debt component, right? If equity goes down in my firm, what happens to the debt? It's going to increase the percentage, right? So what's that going to do to my interest tax shield? Probably going to reduce my cost of capital. Why? Debt's more favorable than equity. One minus the tax rate, right? By borrowing $100 million and buying $100 million of stock, what have I done? Increase my debt, decrease my equity. I am more leveraged now. What happens if I just had it on my balance sheet already? How would that be different if I didn't have to borrow? Say I just had, $100 million in assets in cash sitting there.
Reduce your assets.
Okay?
You reduce your assets.
Reduce my assets.
It's not an asset.
Increase your liability too, right?
Reduce my assets, but then also what? I don't get the advantage of the tax shield, do I? Because I'm just taking money from my assets, which is mine, right? I'm going to change the structure, right?
But even if you have the assets, you can still borrow. You can still.
Oh, absolutely. Apple, like I said, Apple has a ton of cash. Absolutely. Apple has $150 billion in cash. You want to borrow money? Come on over. Let's talk. That's what they mean by homemade leverage. Like we said, Apple doesn't need to. They do it because they don't want to bring the money over because of tax. They make leverage, and they really don't need to. It's just because of that. Google's issued a few bonds too. Do they really need the bonds? No. Leverage.
But then, if they are borrowing that particular money, then what's the NPV like NPV should decrease, right? Because
If the WCC decreases,
we saw that WSCC increased as you borrowed. Sorry, WSCC
decrease,
decreased,
because of one less tax sheet, yep.
right? So shouldn't your NPV decrease along with it? Because you are now borrowing that much amount. No, it should not, it will remain the same, sorry.
No, it's okay. You're thinking around my, no. You're thinking like a finance guy now, be careful. You can't go back, you know. Pretty soon you'll be telling everybody debt is good. That increases the value of my firm.
We have been taught like that is bad, get rid of it.
Uh-huh. My favorite is though that increases the value of the firm. That's my favorite. Do firms prefer that? Yes, they do. Why? It's easier to issue. There are more bond buyers out there. Who's a big bond buyer? Banks, insurance companies. Debt is also much cheaper to issue. And then when you add in the tax deductibility of the interest payments, it makes it obvious. External financing. Capital expenditures, look at the yellow line. Debt. Guess why it went so low in about 2008? And then in 91. Bad times, nobody can get any money, right? Nobody can borrow. Look at equity side.
It would increase during this.
Yep. So, debt, relationship with debt.
So it means the equity increase means most of the companies were saving the amount or they were issuing more bonds.
More bond, well, more bonds.
They were not getting the loans but issuing more bonds.
They can't even, but once you get in a bad economy, you can't do anything. I mean, basically the loan market, everything dried up, even bond issuance. Especially for the banks, because the banks, nobody could trust what was on their balance sheet. So there was no, the banks weren't even lending to each other on an overnight basis. So are you going to go and say, hey, I'll take Citigroup for 10 years? No, you wouldn't at that point. The bank won't even take them overnight. JP Morgan, they won't. Here, does this make sense? Broadcasting. Why is broadcasting so expensive? How come so high debt? Office and retail makes sense, right? Because you got to put up a building. Healthcare facilities, once again, a building, right?
Because they have to buy the licenses?
Distribution, too, right? I think in broadcasting, they're also including, are they including cable companies?
No. It's more.
What's cable company? Oh, here we go. Cable and satellite's pretty obvious because of the, to get to your house, especially for cable. Yeah, broadcasting, there's a lot of content they have to buy too. A lot of what they have on their stations, they don't produce. They don't own, so they have to go buy it. Railroads is kind of interesting. Not that high debt, you would think with all the infrastructure, right? It's kind of built already. Debt to value ratio, advertising, communications equipment, you can imagine why that is. Firm does not need to use 100%, but the firm does need to have taxable earnings. Well, that makes sense. In order to use an interest tax shield, you actually have to have earnings. Tax benefit, taxes, level, levels of interest. Interest payments as a percentage of EBIT. That's how you know crash is coming. Look at the last peak there. Everybody's getting debt. What does that mean? Run the other way. Any questions? Who wants to go home? So, don't forget, we have the mini case, just answer the questions. And I think the homework is 3 problems, right? 1 from 14 and 2 from 15. Any questions, email me. And the summaries for the discussion questions will be out tomorrow sometime.